and I put in here, this applies to all sentient beings. All sentient beings, awake beings in the cosmos, not just human, not just ET, but also in these other dimensions, so-called afterlife, what have you. So you have, all of you know about waking. You're awake now. Hopefully you're still awake. If not, I'll find a Zen master, come around with a stick and go clunk. No, I'm just kidding. We won't do that. Or a nun. Didn't the nuns do that? And so you have waking, you're all awake now. Sleeping, you all go to bed and go to sleep. Dreaming, we've spoken about. Lucid dreams and lucid precognition, we've spoken about. Now, the lucid precognition is important to understand. All that is the ability to be awake in a dream and see something that's going to happen in the future, whether it's tomorrow or a week or a year from now. I met my wife in a lucid precognitive dream. I was in Israel in 1978, and I had these 5 dreams in a row, very strange, where this enlightened being came to me and introduced me to this woman that I'd never met. Said, this is who we wish for you to marry. And it's like an arranged marriage, but it was like from the other side. I went, well, fine, I'm 22. I could no more be interested in being married than the man in the moon. But I said, okay. So I told a friend, I said, I need to look for who this person is. And so I did. I act on these things, which is something that most people don't. And about a month or two later, the person who's now my wife, Emily, came to Israel for a conference. She was in the Peace Corps in the Caribbean, and doing kind of physical therapy, occupational therapy, setting up rehab places where there were none, because they were just throwing people into like horrible settings with no rehab. And she was there for a conference. I saw her, because you don't go up to a stranger and say, hi, I had a dream with you, let's get married, right? I mean, it's like, what? Well, you might, but it's like a little whacked out. So I go, all right, so we met, we had this amazing immediate bond. But I didn't even tell her my last name. I said a prayer and I said, if this is really who you wish for me to marry, she has to contact me before I will ever contact her again. So she did. She went back to the Caribbean, wrote to where I was working in Israel, and just with my first name from North Carolina, because I was talking about the mountains in North Carolina and how beautiful, and it got to me. So with that, I said, okay, now remember, there are no cell phones. Making a phone call was very expensive in '78 internationally. So we wrote airmail letters and then sent little audio tapes back and forth. And so we had about a year courtship that way, met in Alaska for a 10-day courtship together, and then decided to be married, and that was 39, 40 years ago. So that's that. But that's how I met her. And it's a true story. It's very strange, maybe, but it's not that strange. And so that lucid precognitive dream state can be highly instructive. And in some cultures, like the Aboriginals in Australia, dream time is a huge part of their culture, this lucid dreaming. I'm part Cherokee Indian. My grandmother is Cherokee. I'm a quarter. It was very big in the Cherokee tradition to have these lucid dreams and learning in the dream state and seeing into the future, et cetera, and so on. So that's something that's folded within all of us. All of us can practice lucid dreaming. And then there's, in meditation, and various meditation techniques, you can access that unbounded pure consciousness, something called samadhi. So that transcendent state of consciousness is simply you're being aware of awareness without having your attention divided into perceptions that are discrete, individual perceptions. It's the experience of just the pure state of quiet consciousness in and of itself. It's very attainable by everyone. Everyone makes it more difficult. I teach different meditation techniques and people can experience that. It's very easy, actually. So all of you know about meditation and the samadhi state. Now, this is where it gets interesting, and this is just more from a Vedic perspective. You could divide this understanding up in many different traditional ways. There's cosmic consciousness. That is the experience of that unbounded infinite mind, even while you're up walking around doing daily activities, dreaming, sleeping, waking. So in other words, you're tied into and intimately aware and experiencing directly that unbounded aspect of consciousness seamlessly, even while you're doing things. You're not just sitting quietly in meditation, experiencing that samadhi state. That's cosmic consciousness. So that's the first of the higher states of consciousness that begins to evolve if you become a regular meditator and experiencing this on a regular basis, which is why you should be meditating 2-3 times a day and occasionally go on a meditation retreat that's an intensive. We just got off of one up at Mount Shasta. Now, as that begins to develop, and by the way, again, this is linear, but it's actually more organic. They unfold together, and aspects of one state begin to blip in and get experienced as you have others. The next one has been called God consciousness, mainly because of God's such a loaded word. You begin to have experiences of the direct perception of these other dimensions, celestial realm, and eventually that most great light creator being, but all the time. So you can look at a plant and see its astral aura. You can see spirit beings as they move in. You're in touch with the celestial realm. You can see that most great light, and you have this intimate experience of what people have called the expressed aspect of the Godhead, of the unbounded being as that state. Does that make sense? Then, and that is the place where all the various powers and cities are fully established. Siddhis is the Vedic term, but in other tradition it just becomes divine powers, or such as levitation, materialization, dematerialization. We'll get into these in a moment. Then as you get established in this state in a permanent way, you have this experience of unity consciousness where you have a direct perception of the unbounded, infinite, inner quiet self being present even within and present in all places and things. So it's the saying that goes, all this is that, this being a capital T, where you see the perfect unity, that everything is in fact conscious and consciousness, and that great being expressing, phasing, resonating as that tree or this table or this person. And so you're in a perfect state of unity. And that is, at that point, the perfect state of equanimity and also great compassion, the compassion of the Buddha, because you are all beings, you are all things, and you're experiencing it directly. It's not an intellectualization or an ethical teaching only, it's a direct experience. Unity consciousness. And then one that's been described, and this is my own definition of it from my own experience, is Brahman consciousness, which is you're experiencing that, but at will can experience the entirety of the manifested cosmos, the galaxies. All of those are part of your, or accessed, and you have a sort of universality of this unity consciousness, so that far galaxies, other dimensions, you're actually experiencing those at will. Does that make sense? So these are just, now this is just the beginning. There are actually many higher states above this, but they've not been articulated in any literature. And to my knowledge, humans haven't experienced them because we can only experience so far. But this is, in the mystic literature, it says, all of this is but one chamber of the heart, of which there are 4. And the rest would be recounted could a kindred soul be found. In other words, a soul capable of comprehending it. This is beautiful because all of you have heard of this. You've heard of enlightened beings who've been able to teleport or materialize an object or levitate. Even in the early Christian era, before it got stamped out, the very enlightened practitioners of prayer and meditation were found floating up at the top of cathedrals, levitating, physically levitating. Well documented. But of course, that's not supposed to be possible, but it is possible. Why is it possible? The gap, consciousness, causality, astral, physical. They're all enfolded. And if you know how to operate at a deep level of consciousness, you can create an impulse, an intention where you levitate. Or it may happen spontaneously, just as when you're in a state of bliss. I've had a couple experiences of the levitation. I wasn't trying to. I was on an advanced training course, teacher training. I was a teacher of meditation before I was a doctor. In my misspent youth, instead of chasing skirts and dropping acid, I was spending 8 hours a day in meditation at retreats. After this near-death experience I had, I went, man, I want to figure out what this is about, you know. So I didn't care about college at all. I went to college, but it was like, eh. And I began to practice this meditation very deeply. And one time I was walking it was early spring up in upstate in New York, Livingston Manor. And I was on this course where I was meditating 8-9 hours a day. And it was so beautiful, and I'm so connected to earth and nature that I was in this state of such joy. I just spontaneously lifted up, not quite this high, about this high, and floated from like here to the wall over there. Maybe, 30, 50 feet, just floated. And then my intellect and ego kicked in, and I went, you have to be in a state of flow consciousness for this to happen. But it happens. A lot of people experience levitation. So that's one of them. The top one, remote viewing, a lot of studies. We have a gentleman here today, Lance Mungia, who's coming out with a film called Third Eye Spies. It's all about the CIA, DARPA, Stanford Research Institute, International Institute, and others back in the days, experimenting and doing work for the intelligence community on using consciousness to see remote places. It's called remote viewing. And that's just a modern pop culture term for being a seer, S-E-E-R. Someone who can see beyond the limits of linear space-time without the help of FaceTime or something like that, where they can do it through consciousness. But why is that possible? The only reason you're able to remote view or have a precognitive view of the future is because the consciousness, the true nature of the consciousness that allows you to be awake at this instant, this moment, right now, is omnipresent. Omnipresent in space and time, which means you can see any point in space and you can see any point in time, going back as far as you want. Now, going forward, you can only talk of probable futures because it's all probabilities based on what people do. Anyone who says it's fixed on a timeline doesn't understand how the cosmos is organized. So that's why, the soothsayers who say, on October 30th, this is going to happen, they're always wrong. I'll tell you why they're wrong. Because by the time they say it, they've changed enough variables by people hearing it that it's altered the outcome. Now, all of these have a corollary technologically. So view this as the innate capabilities and / human and ET capabilities that are scientifically done through electronic systems and very advanced physics. So just like we have remote viewing that can be done through exploring consciousness and meditation, you can have technology-assisted consciousness. These are systems that help you hook up to that enable and facilitate remote viewing of different points in space or time. And these have been developed by all interstellar civilizations, and classified projects have quite a few of these that they've developed. Beginning in 1956, the man who had invented the systems that got taken over by the CIA was a member of my team. He was very elderly. And he had developed the electronics so that you could hook up to a headset and remote view anywhere. That was in 56. Highly classified. But he offered that system to me. I said, no, I would like to live a few more days. And then you have these systems that help with remote viewing technologically. So visualize civilizations and classified projects that have electronic systems that facilitate the natural experience of scientific remote viewing or precognition and what have you. So those are fully operational. One of my military advisors had been read into, that's military speak, to a project, and this was in the early 70s, at White Oaks Naval Facility in Maryland. It's now closed, where they had a device, an electronic system that could target any point, any place on the earth and extract from what the mystics would call the Akashic record, anything that had ever been said or happened in that volume of space. So they could target this volume of space. They could extract what is going on now, what happened last night, what happened 10 years ago, what happened 1,000 years ago, what happened 1 billion years ago in this area of space-time. Fully operational and had been around for a while as of the early to mid-70s. So those systems exist. Now imagine if that's what we have in classified, highly compartmented, unacknowledged special access projects. Begin to think about what an interstellar civilization has, which is many orders of magnitude beyond that. The precognition we talked about, lucid dreams, well, there's an aspect of this called technology-assisted consciousness that lets you see in the future. We mentioned this, but there was an operation Looking Glass and Red Light that's classified projects that we have witnesses for in my project who are military and aerospace and technology guys, where they had worked on this trying to figure out those systems for the intelligence community and military. And I have almost 1,000 of these sort of deep insider whistleblowers now who work with me, who want the public to know what I'm telling you, by the way. And I mentioned levitation, beautiful. You can do it innately. There are techniques that you can learn for levitating. It's not important. It's more important that you learn how to be in a state of pure consciousness, because if you develop the central operating system is unbounded mind. If you develop that, these other things will unfold within you spontaneously as you need them. So don't waste time trying to learn a city in and of itself. If anything, it's a distraction. It's better if it unfolds naturally, in my opinion. It's a bit of wisdom. Now, that correlation is electromagnetogravitics, so-called anti-gravity. Now, this is something that was studied back in the 20s. T. Townsend Brown was doing work with crystalline structures and certain frequencies where they would begin to levitate. That was 28, 29. Imagine what we had by the 40s, and then extrapolate into an interstellar civilization that have technologies that are way beyond that. But in the U.S. intelligence, military, aerospace community, what's called gravity control, the ability to control gravity, which is actually controlling mass. We'll get into this in a minute. That was established in October of 1954. So from 1954 forward, we have not needed jets, rockets, surface roads, et cetera, and so on. That is a fact. But it's highly classified, and for some good reasons, because any of those systems could be weaponized into a missile delivery system. So you could get from here to Tehran in a couple seconds, maybe a minute or two, a lot faster than an ICBM rocket. Okay, remember, rockets are 40s, Wernher von Braun. Jets were being developed in the 30s, 40s. Internal combustion engines, the car you drove up here in, 1880s, 1888 Mercedes. Your Tesla, those of you who think you're being so cool, it's an electric motor which has been around since the late 1800s, plugged into a coal-fired power grid, or nuclear, or gas. It's not a Tesla, it's a Musk. There's a difference between a Musk and a Tesla. A Tesla would be pulling energy out of the fabric of space-time, okay? Sorry, Elon. Well, I mean, it's true. I mean, and we don't have, our civilization's running out of time to do the little do-si-dos of pretend breakthroughs. We need to have some big breakthroughs fast. Trust me, believe me, we're running out. All right, let's do it. Yeah. So those, and there are consciousness-assisted technologies that interface and permit this sort of levitation effect, so that you can be wired into a craft, and your consciousness is helping guide it, but also is affecting its movement. Then you have what have been called teleportation. Now, you've heard of people who have appeared to sort of vanish in one place and reappear in another, like some of the great masters. That's something humans can do, and it's a teleportation experience. This can also be done electronically and through physics and transdimensional physics, where you can then teleport a craft and the beings within it across the vast distances of space. I have one of our witnesses who's in the Disclosure Project material, Fred Threadfell, who was up at an Air Force base in 1953 in Canada. And they were experimenting with the electronics of this, where it was very prosaic. It was an ashtray, and they would create a resonant field around it here, and then they had a place for it to go to at another part in the base, and it would go back and forth, dematerializing, teleporting, boom, 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 back and forth. That was 53. All right, so that was 65 years ago. Now that's human classified research and development. Now extrapolate hundreds of thousands to millions of years into the future, what interstellar civilizations have. Then you have, this is a continuation of this. This is by no means exhaustive. The list that goes on and on and on, we'd be here all day. But this dematerialization, rematerialization. Now you say, well, that's the same as teleportation. It isn't. It is and it isn't. But it's a stationary, it can be a stationary experience where you can, in any volume of space, by accessing that cosmology on the first slide, set up a resonant field where something can be materialized in that volume of space. And you've heard of various adepts in India and elsewhere who can materialize a gem or materialize a ring or materialize a stone or a ruby. Well, that can be done by understanding how consciousness is omnipresent, but within the field of consciousness within each of us are all these other finer levels that can then be accessed, so you could bring something into 3D, not by pulling it from somewhere else, but by manifesting it from the elementals, let's call it, the subatomic, at that interface in the gap, and then cause that thing to go poop, pop, right there. Got it? That's what materialization. So that's been done innately by humans. Now it also can be done through technological systems. So you could have an interstellar spacecraft hovering outside this window. You wouldn't see it. It's dematerialized, and it could be in a very fine level of that cosmological structure that was outlined prior. And if it wanted to, it could go blip, fully materialize in a nanosecond, and then dematerialize in another nanosecond. We have actually had that happen up at Mount Shasta. Craft would appear, disappear right in front of us. Huge interstellar craft. Cool stuff. You'll see some pictures later. So that's something that can be done through transdimensional interstellar physics. And also, to an extent, has been experimented with in classified projects. They're hitting some problems, the limits of what they've been able to do with our $21 trillion in covert black money. So manifestations of objects, I've mentioned. Materialization, dematerialization. An object can go and be here and just go through a resonant shift, and that can cause this to disappear. It's still there, but where is there? It's in those finer, near astral resonant fields in the gap, in the interface between 3D and other dimensions. Does that make sense? But it can be done electronically. It's all electronics, really advanced electronics. I'm not, not this. The manifestation of objects is something that, as I mentioned, mystics can do, but ET craft can do that, and this is where you get into extraterrestrial manufacturing systems. What we call, okay, back up. You came up here in a Ford or a Tesla, doesn't matter. The metal was dug up out of the earth, smelted, turned into steel, aluminum, alloys, bolted and riveted and welded together, blah, 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 blah. That's linear manufacturing. Now let's talk about non-locality manufacturing, where by setting up a standing wave in the near astral interface, this gap between 3D and these other dimensions, you set up like a blueprint, an architect, but it's a resonant blueprint, resonance blueprint. That can cause an object then to come into 3D, and it'll be perfect. It's seamless. It's made of the purest materials. This is why when we've studied the remains of ET craft that we have been downing with advanced scalar longitudinal weapons, the composites and the materials are things that we can't even create from Earth raw materials in the vacuum of space. I mean, they're just unbelievably pure. And that's why the light and the energy from these craft are so extraordinary. Because it's not their ships are materialized, let's call it, or manufactured from that deeper level of assembly. It's not being assembled from digging stuff out of the ground and smelting it. It's being assembled from that resonant field that, and then is brought into 3D. So it's incredibly pure. And by the way, the way you can tell a difference between a classified anti-gravity aircraft that looks like a UFO and an interstellar is the man-made ones have seams. There are rivets and parts and this and that. The interstellar, nope, none. You've heard of enlightened masters and adepts who've been able to bilocate, and the same person would be in the same place, two different places at the same time. And of course, there's this phenomenon of the spooky effect that Einstein described of particles, the same particle being in two places at once and sort of resonantly affecting two places at the same time, which violated all of his understanding of physics, because his understanding of physics did not go transdimensional. It's a big problem in physics, actually. So this ability that humans have innately can also be done through transdimensional interstellar physics. And there was some person who had been on my executive committee for a while named Burl Ives. He was an actor, singer, and really great guy. Interesting, 33-degree Mason, but had no access to this information through the. So he and his wife were very interested in this. Well, I taught them the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind protocols, and Dorothy Ives was practicing them with her granddaughter in Anacortes, Washington, where they were living at the time. And she had amazing contact happen. Craft that appeared on the clouds and moved from here to there. One night, early morning, she came down from upstairs to their bedroom, and I'd been in this house many times, into her foyer, and there was an ET craft materialized outside the courtyard and kind of bluish with this beam of light and energy coming into the foyer. And they were saying, "Do not be afraid. We are always with you. You will be protected." She said, "Oh, how strange." But she intuitively was told to pick up her phone and call her best friend in LA who was in the middle of the Northridge earthquake. And her friend said, there is this craft described identically, a carbon copy of the craft that was over the Burl Ives house in LA, where it was outside her house, a beam coming in, and in her mind, telepathically, was receiving the same message: do not be afraid, we are always with you, you will be protected. But she was in the middle of the earthquake, and they didn't know how bad it was going to get. Now, that's a very strange story, but it's actually very common if you understand transdimensional interstellar physics. And Dorothy Ives asked me, do you think that was the same craft in two places? I said, yes, it was. Because they can bilocate, trilocate, quadrilocate, et cetera, and so on. But that is another capability, because there is a ability. Linear space-time is really an illusion, because the entirety of this multiverse and all these dimensions are folded within it. And once you master that, that explains all these things that have been called siddhis, S-I-D-D-H-I, the Vedic powers and abilities. And then, of course, you can do remote healing events. You've heard of this. We talked about intercessionary prayer and things of this sort. And it's very beautiful. And this translates into extraordinary transdimensional interstellar medical technologies that involve consciousness-assisted technology, technology that is assisting the mind and the astral subtle body, non-local resonant field medicine, et cetera, and so on. The future of medicine will move away from chemicals and surgical into things that look like Star Trek tricorder sort of stuff, but that will be working on that level transdimensionally. And the ETs have those systems already fully operational. Some classified projects have versions of it, none of which can be disclosed without also tipping the hand to the energy, the physics behind the energy, which would terminate ExxonMobil, the petrodollar, the gangbangsters, your utility company, your road system builders, Boeing jet engines, rockets, internal combustion engines, coal, gas, all of it. So $1,000 trillion in assets would vanish if any of that were disclosed. Therefore, they've decided to keep it secret. Meanwhile, we die of cancer and other diseases unnecessarily. But the point I'm making is, in the future, these will be in full application, and they've already pretty heavily developed in classified projects. Interstellar civilizations have a very high level of this development. So we've had experiences with our CE5 teams last year in Arizona up on a mountain, and we'll get to this in a moment. There was a man, we were doing our circle and we were doing the meditation, the remote viewing, doing the protocols to contact the ETs through the CE5 protocols. And we saw this red, orange thing about this big that blipped in, a kind of oval teardrop shaped, and it just goes boop, boop, in a fraction of a second. Someone had the lens of their camera open, and in the picture is this fairly large ET with a triangular head with some kind of device he was holding in a tunic. And the man that was right beside the ET had this amazing contact experience with him that continued throughout the evening and night till the wee hours of the morning. And he had had a permanent hearing loss with hearing aids, and that next day he came to the meetings and he was totally healed. He had no hearing loss. And to this day he doesn't. So that was an interstellar ET hearing of this man. He was very pure-hearted, and he stayed with it, and his hearing loss was gone. He just threw away his hearing aids. That happened a year ago in May. Beautiful. Wait, you see the picture. We have a photograph of this ET in our circle. You'll see it in a moment. This is where it gets really interesting. Michio Kaku, many of you have heard the name, has talked about us getting from a level 0 civilization to a level 1. Peter Thiel has talked about us going from 0 to 1 technologically, because we really are stuck. That there's innovation around the edges, but there's been no big breakthroughs. Well, I got news for Mr. Thiel and for Michio Kaku. We have the big breakthroughs, big, huge breakthroughs. They are classified. And they are classified because the internet, smartphones, YouTube, Netflix, Amazon, those are really not disruptive. This stuff would really transform our civilization. And so the stakeholders, the multi-hundred trillion dollar stakeholders, would have to find something else to do besides being petro-Nazis and gangbangsters. But that's another issue. But when we go through this, our civilization is, the bad news, we're level 0. Our entire world, the globe, the earth, human civilization, we're at level 0. The good news is we're going to make it all the way to at least 7 or 8, and you'll see this in a moment, in the next few 100,000 years, which we'll describe. Now, this is the current human predicament. We're we have disunity, war, primitive environmental destroying technologies, and we're at this point of extinction level events. So a level 0 civilization would be the current conundrum that we're in now. And that is, we have advanced enough technologically to have cars, jets, nuclear weapons, but spiritually and socially we have not advanced to where we could have those technologies and behave in a way that wouldn't destroy the planet. It's sort of an existential realization and a crisis that the root of this is the lack of recognition of the central oneness we have, not only with each other, but with the cosmos. In a lot of ways, the problem is a spiritual problem, not religious, but the solution is spiritual also, deeply spiritual. I have a theorem. Spirituality is usually inversely proportional to religiosity. So the trappings of the catechisms of religion often bring people further away from true spirituality because it becomes a matter of control and demagoguery, which is what men do. But if we were to look at true spiritual development and the pursuit of higher states of consciousness that I went through a moment ago, those higher states of consciousness are all attainable by every one of us. But the first level of consciousness we have to attain to live on this planet, to get to a level 1 globally peaceful civilization, is to understand there is only, as Erwin Schrödinger said in 1908, who was one of the fathers of quantum mechanics, but it was a particle wave theory, he said the total number of minds in the universe is 1. That is, it's a singularity. Consciousness is a singularity, and therefore all of us are one great being moving around in different individual expressions of ourselves, of that great being. And that once we realize there is this deep and ineffable experiential level of oneness, we're not going to want to engage in warfare because my God is better than your God, I'm Catholic and you're a Protestant, we'll blow each other up in Ireland, I'm Sunni, you're Shia, we're going to blow each other up in Iraq, I'm this, you're that. That whole divisiveness. The problem is, the thrust of the classified projects and almost all of the UFO subculture is to show the alien UFO phenomenon as the good guys and the bad guys, and the cowboys and the Indians, and they're the grays and the reptilians versus the ones that are Nordic and of course always look like a beautiful woman from Sweden. Let's call it out. It's interstellar racism instead of planetary racism. It's racism in a different guise. It's just flat out racist. So to get to here, we have to transcend isms. We live in a time of all the isms. Capitalism versus communism, racism, homophobia, all the religiosity and ethnic divisions, all of that is a symptom of something more central. And this is a lack of the spiritual realization of the ineffable oneness of all intelligent life. And that isn't just human, but interstellar as well. That is the foundation of universal peace. Now, to get to this, which is not just peaceful on this earth, it's no good to have world peace if it's based on an interplanetary war. That's not going forward, my friends. It just isn't going forward. To have interplanetary war be the thing that unites us, as Ronald Reagan said at the United Nations, oh, wouldn't our job of creating world unity be easier if we had a common alien threat to unite against? No, no, no. We don't have to unite the world around another fight. However, that would greatly enrich the military, industrial, laboratory, finance complex, which is what's running the planet into the ground. All right? So we're going to ground hard, and we're facing an extinction level event, particularly if we go there. My main focus for the last 20 years at the Pentagon and CIA is to pull those folks away from things that I haven't ever talked about, that are fully operational, that are trying to be agent provocateur, to provoke an interplanetary war that is actively going on. It's very dangerous. It's the main thing I talked about with Boutros-Ghali, the UN Secretary General in the 90s. But this could lead to an extinction level event. Several things. One, thermonuclear weapons, obviously, mutual assured destruction as it's called. Two, biosphere collapse, because we've stayed with fossil fuels and nuclear and those systems for 100 years longer than we should have. We should have had Tesla type, real Tesla type systems 100 years ago, and could have. We should have had no surface roads by the mid-50s. Forget the Eisenhower interstate system, didn't need it. We should have had a globally prosperous, peaceful civilization by the League of Nations that got subverted after World War I, and then we had World War II. And the militarists want to have World War III, and as Douglas MacArthur said, will be interplanetary. That's what they want. They want global destruction and war. These are sick puppies who are running these operations. I know a lot of them. This level of zero civilization is where we are. The foundation, the root of that dysfunction is the lack of the understanding of the oneness of all life, not just on Earth, but in space, in the heavens. So that is a deep consciousness. This is the deep ethics behind the science of consciousness that can transfer into sociology and psychology and politics. It needs to happen. And it's going to happen through sort of a field effect that we call the 1% effect we'll get to in a moment. So once there is a certain consensus in consciousness to live together peacefully and to do so from a deep level of the experience of the transcendent aspect, non-local aspect of consciousness, a really deep level of spirituality. It's more than a religious catechism. It's the experience of that ineffable oneness that Edgar Mitchell experienced when he was on the moon and looked back and saw the earth and could go away with his thumb. That level of cosmic awareness, not necessarily fully established in cosmic awareness, but the experience of that oneness in pure consciousness and meditative states and understanding of it, you need 1%. So we need 75 million people. It's 7.5 billion on the planet, do the math. We need 75 million people actively in that state and not only just thinking about it intellectually, but experiencing it and acting that way. Then we get here. Now, how does that happen with 1%? You know, they've done studies with meditators, or they'll send them into a city, and there'll be a group of people meditating. If they have 1%, say a city has 250,000 people, so 1% of that would be 2,500. So if you send 2,500 people in there who are in meditation together and stay there for some time, the crime rates go down. There is more coherence in society. This has been documented. But it's interesting because in non-human, non-sociological studies, guess what? They found the same thing. It's called field coherence, quantum mechanics. So take, for example, the superfluidity in helium. You can take a container of helium, cool it down to absolute zero, which is minus 260 or 70 degrees, something like that. And as you begin to do that, the helium atoms begin to become aligned coherently. When 1% become coherent, there's what's called a phase transition. And the entire container of helium becomes superfluid. And it can go up and around and through, and it's total coherence. It takes 1%. Not 99, not 51, it's not voting. It's a 1% of genuine coherence. So if 1% of us can become coherent in deeper consciousness, it would move the entire planet to a level 1 right here. See what I'm saying? This is a message of good hope. 1% is attainable. It's 1 out of 100 souls on this planet. Very doable. And now, here's a cautionary footnote. As you approach the phase transition, the chaos within the milieu, within the container, becomes more and more chaotic. It looks chaotic. It starts roiling and boiling and being crazy. Pretty much describes our society now, right? But when it hits that 1%, and it's a stable 1%, not transitory, then the whole thing goes through this phase transition. It's completely calm and magical. That's where we're headed. We are very close to that phase transition. But to make it through in the best way possible for our children and our children's children, our children's children's children, and frankly, the 20,000 generations of souls waiting to come here for this next yuga, this era that we're entering, we got to get this right. We need that 1% in a established fashion. At that point, you have a global peaceful civilization. And when you have that, all things are possible. Why? Because the technology, here's a message of great hope for everyone of any age, particularly younger people who feel so like the world is going to hell in a handbasket because there's nothing they can do about it. There's everything we can do about it. Because we can come together in unity, we can enter into this coherent state in meditation and action. And when the world can make this transition to a level 1, all these technologies that have been in classified projects for 60 years can be used because they will only be used for peaceful purposes. They will not be used as a weapon. Now, remember, all technologies are double-edged swords, and it is based on the consciousness of those who wield it. I can take a knife and put butter on the bread, or I can take it and slit your throat. The knife doesn't care. The knife doesn't care. It's the consciousness of those who wield it. So we need to have the enlightened and the good people of Earth, which is most people, understand this and make this happen so that these technological breakthroughs that have been extant for decades in classified projects can be put into peaceful utilization, which would allow the Earth to heal. It would eliminate poverty in one generation. It would eliminate all pollution immediately with these technologies. There's no effluent. Manufacturing would be transformed to zero pollution. Transportation, utilities, energy generation, all of it has zero pollution. You wouldn't need surface roads. Forget the 101 being clogged up with an accident, or the 405 or 95 or wherever you live, or outside Paris on the Beltway. All of that is an artificial state because the state of coherence and peace has been forestalled. We're all responsible for that. And the aggressiveness of sociopaths in the corporate, military, intelligence, governmental worlds that have taken it upon themselves to keep the fires of conflict and war burning longer than they should have ever been allowed. Now, these interstellar civilizations understand this. They're watching, they're waiting patiently, but there's a limit to how far we can go before we blow the system and have an extinction level event, which would be a biosphere collapse, a massive war with these weapons, or worse, the fools that have these technologies who are weaponizing them and putting them on satellites targeting ET craft provoke something that we could not recover from. So I think that this is why disclosure is important. The CE5 initiative of making contact peacefully with these civilizations is important, and your own meditation practice and pursuit of enlightenment is so important to the future of humanity. It's critical. This is not a philosophical angels on the head, the tip of a pin sort of thing. This is essential, and we are in a global emergency that needs an emergency intervention. And as I always joke, I'm an emergency doctor. I know an emergency when I see one. So guess what? We're in one. But it's like the frog being boiled, and the heat's going up slowly, 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 and the frog doesn't know until it's cooked. It's cooked. So we're about to get cooked. The biosphere is cooking, the waterways are dying, the land is polluted. There's a balkanization of left and right and sort of proto-fascists and neo-fascists. And in Charlottesville, where I live, we had the fascists run over that lady last August. All of that, that's not sustainable. That's not a sustainable paradigm. We have to have a sustainable paradigm based in consciousness and peace and higher states of consciousness. And it isn't going to be everyone on Earth, but we need the 1%. The phase transition, there you go. So that's what we have to do. Once we have this, then medical technologies that are based on trans-dimensional physics can be used, would be used, and developed quickly. Everything you're using for energy would be from 0-point energy, which is the ability to tap into that deep level of the baseline energy field of the cosmos. And it's estimated that the volume inside a coffee cup has enough energy in it to boil off the Earth's oceans. It's a huge amount of energy. And of course, Tesla called it the infinite energy field. Professor Dirac called it the Dirac Sea, modestly, after himself. But whatever, it's there, it's been proven to be there, technologies have been developed based on it. But that's what we need to have. And then all the other ones can come in. Electromagnetogravitics. If you're a peaceful civilization, not using it for a missile launch system, then instead of having a Airbus 380 or 747 to go to Europe or Australia, you go up, a few minutes later you land. Wonderful. Those are fully developed and operational in classified projects. We have them, we're not using them, and in order to use them fully, we're going to have to function like a level 1 civilization. The hallmark of which is we are in a permanent, not transitory, permanent state of global peace, but interglobal as well, interplanetary. World peace would have been great around 1900 to 1920, but in this time, we're already in an interstellar period, and so it has to be universal peace. So this is why the motto is universal. Our objective is universal peace, not world peace. It's too late for just world peace. People need to kind of catch up with where the trend, things are moving forward whether people want it to or not. And it is. So once we reach this state of global and universal peace, and we have de-weaponized space, we have made peaceful contact with these civilizations, we have made peace with ourselves, these extraordinary technologies that are already in existence can be put into full application. And that world, which could happen within 20 years, will be more different than today is from the Stone Age. Literally more different. But there are stakeholders in the current order that don't want that to happen. Whether it's the war machine, the military-industrial complex, the technology sector, the energy sector, the transportation sector, the medical sector. We're talking unbelievable amounts of the macroeconomic system we're in is based on a collapsing order, and that it's an order that's destroying the planet in the meanwhile. So to move off that trajectory, we're going to have to make some very hard, grown-up decisions very quickly, because we're living right now in a period of the biggest mass extinction of species since the dinosaurs. And it's all man-made. All of it's man-made. We're doing all of this. So we've created the problem, we can solve the problem. But to get there has to come from, as Einstein said, a different level of consciousness than what created it. We can't replace international conflict or racism or homophobia or ethnic conflict or religious conflict with interplanetary xenophobia and conflict, which is the main thrust of the fake disclosure efforts that are going on, and which is people of goodwill and conscience need to understand what's really happening out there. And then once you have this permanent peace, this level 2, these get fully established, and the pursuit of the science of consciousness is the central, this is the key thing between a 1 and a 2. Now all these things are overlapping, just like the other states of consciousness. These, the seeds of this are already in level 1, level 0, we're working on that. The seeds of a level 2 are in this, but then the pursuit of the sciences of consciousness and the interface between consciousness and mind and space, time, matter, electronics, and higher states of consciousness, personal enlightenment, all through those states of cosmic consciousness, God consciousness, unity consciousness, etc., that becomes the central focus of the civilization. Why? Because there's infinite abundance. You push a button, you materialize what you need. There's no scarcity, there's no poverty. People aren't working 80 hours a week with 2 parents trying to have a family. The whole social structure changes where it can then begin to pursue not only creative and artistic pursuits, but the personal individual development of higher states of consciousness. That becomes the main thrust of a level 2 civilization. Next. Thence to interstellar. Now, once the civilization is peaceful and is also can understand transdimensionally all of these systems and is in a state where they're pursuing higher states of consciousness so they can understand what's out there. There's a lot out there that's amazing. You get cleared to be interstellar. So at a level 3, humans will become interstellar, overtly. So we will travel amongst the stars as humans. And then there's the development and widespread establishment of science of consciousness, not just that as a pursuit, and the higher states of consciousness start getting really the pursuit of not just part of the society, but the entire society. So this is a gradual process. It doesn't happen all at once. But the time is, don't think in terms of time. Think in terms of event horizons. Okay? The big mistake, people say, when? Forget time. Time's an illusion. It has to do with milestones and event horizons of what we accomplish as a people. So then you have the early integration overtly into other civilizations. The Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative, we're training people all over the world to do this now. So it's sort of the pioneering vanguard of this. So that's what we're doing. And when inviting them to come visit, and they do, and you'll see some of this in a moment. At level 4, you have at least 1% of the civilization in cosmic consciousness. Why is that important? Because that creates a field effect where everyone else gets pulled along, where they quicken their ability to go into higher states of consciousness, because you then have 1% of the population in the state of real enlightenment, where they're enlightened in the state of unbounded consciousness while they're walking around and have you. So this is a level 4 civilization. These are senior, and the ETs we're encountering that are at this level. Those are the senior ambassadors that are enlightened. They have contact with other advanced civilizations, and they're providing guidance to emerging civilization. What does that mean? In the cosmos at any given time, there are civilizations like we are now, or like we were 10,000 years ago, et cetera, and so on. So you then become mentors. And this is why people say, well, ancient people had contact with ETs. I said, yeah, we did. We did. We've never been alone. We'll never be alone. Have never been alone. And the evidence for that is quite obvious to anyone who looks at it dispassionately. So the reason I put a line here, everyone at birth is born into cosmic consciousness, because that's what, and this could happen fairly quickly. Once you hit that 1%, there is this coherent field shift. So then all the babies and children that manifest in that world are in a state of enlightenment at birth. There's widespread experience of the cities, or these innate Vedic powers, and technologies parallel those states. What does that mean? It means that you can then safely understand in consciousness and do these teleportation, bilocation, but it means because you can experience it and understand it, your technologies mirror it, and you can use them safely without harming, because these are incredibly powerful technologies, both in terms of your personal experience, but also when you apply it into an electronic system, an electromagnetic system, trans-dimensional physics. So these civilizations are part of a senior interstellar council collective that has been operating since time immemorial. And that is the central clearing entity that our group contacts and is cleared through to operate. I've wanted to share this for 25 years, and so here it is. Yeah. So now at this point, a level 6 civilization is one where at least 1% of the population, that coherent field, is in God consciousness, celestial. And that physical world takes on qualities of almost like a high astral world, but it's a physical planet. Everything is just very refined. The technologies, the environment, the consciousness, it's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And so that, is when it really shifts. Level 7 is where celestial and God consciousness, everyone from birth is in that state. All because remember, neuroscience, epigenetic studies recently out of the top universities have found that when you're in a meditative state, it actually not only are those experiences passed on to the next child, but that the neuroplasticity enables the mind to actually be altering its physical form, and it is carried on and passed on in one generation. It used to be thought this had many generations. It's passed on in one. Well, positive and negative. So as you evolve and become more refined, there is this quickening where the children born into those civilizations are in these higher states at birth. And this level 7, everyone is born into that state of celestial perception, full cities, ability to manifest, dematerialize, what have you. And this is a very high, and I'm talking extraterrestrial, physical planets, physical worlds, but it has a corollary on the celestial highest astral, but it's physical. And then we're going to keep going. Level 8 is where you have at least 1% in this state of unity consciousness, where they're able to directly perceive unbounded mind everywhere. Those technologies that are corollaries to that interface with not only the innate cities, but they appear as celestial and can appear as with a thought. So you can manifest spacecraft, places, planets. This gets into some really, the term at the CIA is WSFM, weird science and frickin' magic. It isn't magic, but it's something that many people have an experience with civilizations that are at these levels, 5, 6, 7, 8, and up, and they'll think they had an experience with an angelic being or celestial being because there's so much similarity. All right, but they're distinct, but they're similar because oneness is what it's all about, but also the technologies, when you're talking about a physical planet with physical people, they become transitioning into what have been called light beings and craft that are light ships and civilizations that are everyone on it in these very high states of consciousness. So let's go on to 9, 10. So this is when at birth everyone is, a level 9, everyone is in perfect unity consciousness at birth. Now this is almost too hard to comprehend, but from where we are at a level 0, but these civilizations are out there. We've had contact with these ambassadors. And at this point, about 1% are in this Brahman consciousness, where they're experiencing within themselves not only unboundedness within and unboundedness externally, seeing all of it as one pure conscious field, but can experience the whole cosmic creation at will within mind and consciousness as an individual. So that's this state. And then 10 is when everyone is in that Brahman consciousness state. And it goes, believe it or not, it goes on from there. But this is probably enough for us to sort of contemplate and meditate on. What's interesting about all of these, from a level 0 to a level 10, is that the technologies are commensurate with the level of consciousness. So the consciousness interface with technologies, physical form, physical worlds, physical spacecraft, are an outgrowth of the levels of consciousness attained. But think about our world. Most of our world is in a state of disunity, socially, spiritually fractured and separate from our inner self. Our technologies are destructive, violent, breaking apart things, blowing things up. Your car, you're basically just having a little controlled explosion in an internal combustion engine, burning dinosaur-era fuels, destroying the environment. And so is your electricity that you're charging your Tesla with. So until I'm trying to get these high-tech people to think a little further. So go a little further. Let's go. Come on. All right, it's enough of that. Tinkering around the edges won't do. It's time that we launch to this next level. And that you begin to understand what you see happening technologically and environmentally is a reflection of the level of consciousness of the planet. This is why we need this 1% effect in people who are pursuing higher states of consciousness, meditating, understand this, to create that morphogenic field, this quantum coherent field transition, phase transition, that will then, people you don't even know, will be affected by your state of consciousness. And they've done studies because they will spontaneously move away from the actions and thoughts of destruction. All right? But imagine then, extrapolate that up through these higher states of consciousness, the correlations in technology, in experience, in purpose. And your purpose in the cosmos and being. It's beautiful. As I have understood it, is where humans, we will attain this level where everyone is in this state of God consciousness by the end of this cycle, this yuga, this 500,000 year cycle that just opened. So in the next few 100,000 years, Earth and all of humanity will be at this level, a level 7.